All right, I'm going to call the Capital Committee meeting to order for Monday, November 28th, 2022. It's 7:34 p.m. First order of business is approval of meeting minutes from November 14th, 2022. Were there any comments for Joe?
Just two small ones, Joe. The first one consistent with the prior meeting, just noting Lisa is absent because she's still technically on the committee.
Yep, Jason sent me a note and I added a
Okay.
voting members not present.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
And
And on page 2, the top of page 2, in the first paragraph, maybe this is something that I just don't understand, but quantity, town is quantity eligible, is that the right terminology, or is it currently eligible?
I understand why that might not be completely clear. Maybe how about is quantity discount eligible? Would that make more sense?
Is it just town is eligible for purchase discount?
Sure.
Yeah,
Good.
I think that's fine. It was a discount based on the quantity that we purchase. So.
Okay. That's all I had, Joe. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Jeff covered my point. So are there any others, Karen? All right, then I'll move that we accept the minutes with the changes noted during this meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote. Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. So that's unanimous. Next is review of current debt schedule and ambulance fund balance. These were provided ahead of time. Really, I don't know. I don't plan to do a walkthrough of them. Just more if anyone has any questions of how it works, in particular the ambulance fund. Brian is our resident expert with the debt schedule, but it does kind of obviously lay the groundwork for some of the decisions we'll be making today, what the town meeting will make in the spring, and then obviously some of the decisions that are looming in the upcoming years. Go ahead, Joe.
I had a sort of just a philosophical question. I noted that there was one police cruiser that we were including in 23. Is there any impetus moving forward to put more police cruisers on there, or is this like there was extra money so a police cruiser is going to come out of there this year?
So if you remember the 2 hours of the capital presentation at town meeting, what happened was the schools, and I don't remember who did what, so I'm not going to give credit to anyone. There was a donation for the fire pickup truck. We had slotted the payment for that truck out of the ambulance fund. Obviously, given the budget year that occurred and knowing that the ambulance fund had that balance already set aside, and they ironically were the same number for two very different reasons, there was what I'll call a one-time agreement. I don't think the intent would be to fund your police cruisers from the ambulance fund moving forward, nor do I think it could sustain it with the level of fire capital that there is now and into the future.
Okay, that's how that slid in. All right, that makes makes sense.
Are there any other questions on where we're at? Go ahead, Karen.
I think this is a question about where we're at with the debt schedule. So the debt, do we, I see that it's going, it's going, the total debt is going down. Going down from FY22, through the outer years. Is there a level at which we target debt to be allowable, in the sense that, in FY22 it totals, I think, 4 million, I think, and then it goes down, to FY26 to 2.8 million. So my question is there a target of allowable debt that would indicate that we could finance more capital purchases?
Brian and or Mark, you get first stab at that one.
I'll just say that usually it's like 5% of the operating budget or something like that we target. But obviously it fluctuates a little up or down from where we are. So yes, there is actually a financial policy, and I think it deals with debt. And I'm ashamed to say that we're due to review it and update our targets, but it's typically something like that. So, I will say our debt burden right now is fairly moderate. It's not high. But with the projects that are coming down the pike that are going to be, financed, I think we're going to have to look at it again. So, hope that helps.
Mhm. Yeah, that helps. Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
You all set, Karen, on that piece? Jeff, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, the only thing I had a question on, I know there was a prior discussion about the cost to fix the backup infrastructure over by Dell and whether that could go in the ambulance fund. Is this just a view of what's currently approved so we can have a perspective on how much room there is? Okay, then I have no questions then.
And I guess the question, just to make sure we round out Jeff's commentary, has a funding source been identified for that? Because obviously town meeting would need to approve ambulance fund if that's where it was going to come from.
I
Mark?
think at this point, we're carrying the expenditure within the IT budget. We didn't want to, because there are some expenditures coming from fire, there's some coming from IT. We didn't want to spread it out. We wanted to understand the totality of the project within one source. So I believe that we're carrying it in IT right now. And we're going to see how the year goes. And then, but we have put advisory on notice. And let them know that this may be something we do need to address at some point. And then Brian's favorite way of addressing these things is through interdepartmentals, in June, which is a little bit scary to begin talking about in October, November, but that's something we'll consider. So yeah, we are keeping our options open as to how we may end up paying for that, but that work is ongoing right now. And hopefully, fingers crossed, by Wednesday, Thursday, everything should be transferred over and back up and operating normally.
Okay. So any questions on where we're at before? Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I had a question for Brian because I'm that guy that always asks the silly questions about the bonding, but I noticed that in most all the bonding figures, the figure tends to go down. It's not a constant over the period of the debt. Is that's the way the bonds are structured, so that you're paying a declining amount each year. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's certain situations where you can have a level funded debt, which is structuring a bond payment that's sort of even every year. Excuse me. It's not exactly even, but it's pretty even. That, of course, comes at a cost. So it's an interest cost. So you pay more or at the end of the day for a level funded. But there are certain situations you may consider that. But typical municipal standard bonding is as a declining schedule.
Okay, because I mean, obviously, this is a heightened inflationary period, which is would lend itself to a more level payment structure, and also the time value of money. You're losing a couple of percent every year of the value. Is there any reason that you would advise changing to that type of structure, given that general financial analysis?
We'd have to look at it by, I think, project by project. I hate to say that, but it's not a one size fits all. Yes, there are some situations where you might want to consider a level funded schedule. But typically, usually, I know I hate to say that in this economy, but usually it's a lose situation if you don't do a declining schedule. with
Okay,
interest.
they hit the, how much is the interest difference usually?
It varies, but I like I said, I'd put it situation to situation, and typically, it's just it doesn't go in our favor to pay a level schedule. Like,
Okay.
again, like your mortgage, it just wouldn't pay out to make sense. But I'm not going to say it never makes sense. It does in certain situations.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
Go ahead, Karen. You're on mute.
Thanks. Similar to my other question, so the ambulance fund, is there a target balance of that fund you're trying to adhere to each year, or on average across a few years?
No. So basically, the ambulance fund is a little bit of a unique creature. So it's really, I've been told in the past, it's a funding source and nothing more. And I guess that's right. As far as, the bottom line, it's a funding source. Town meeting can do whatever they want with it. But by law, they do have to have, so basically you have to have the balance in the fund at the end of the year for all your expenditures and estimated revenue for the following year. So it has to be positive. In other words, at the when you go to town meeting, you say what you're going to spend out of it and what you're going to get in it, and it has to be a positive balance. So that's what the DOR requires. But other than that, as long as town meeting approves it, and I don't like to say this, but it can be used for anything, actually. We like to connect it to, particularly fire-related expenses, because, I feel, and I think the administration has felt for a while that's the spirit of the law. But at the end of the day, it can be used for just, you could put the whole balance into just against the budget. Not that that's smart when we've tried to stay away from that, but you could do that theoretically. So there is no, and to answer your question directly, there is no goal to, we just want to keep it solvent, I guess is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if there was, a problem with available funds in the general fund, it could be possible that the ambulance fund could pick up some of that.
Correct. I will say that looking at the schedule of the capital now, I think the ambulance fund is going to be in much need for the next few years. So, for the fire requests. So I don't think we're going to have a lot of extra money available for anything, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
All right, do we want to move on to discussion of the items we've heard now about, and just see where we're at and see if we can't come to consensus on certain things? So that would be item 4 on our agenda. Okay. Here's my thought of how we proceed tonight. We need to agree on a framework. Brian's anxiously awaiting a number to put into all of his spreadsheets that he'll then use to inform updates to the select board and advisory. But I also realize Tony's not here, and I think this is one of the most crucial votes that we take. So especially if we're split on something, obviously, we can potentially revote. But I do think we owe it to Brian to give him the direction he's been yearning for, to, meet kind of some of the budgetary deadlines that the town is up against. The other thing I'll say is, I did not publicize the meeting to department heads saying come, because none of you said you had strong opposition. That doesn't mean that you can't vote against something. What I will do though is, if we do vote against something or have feedback, we'll make sure that department either has a chance to address capital, or is everyone's going to be notified of the joint select board advisory discussion, and or make sure they're aware of the feedback. Everyone's had a chance to come at this point, but just in the interest of full transparency, I think that's how I was planning to kind of deal with wherever we land, because we have not deliberated any of these topics. When the department heads have come, we've been mostly in listen and question mode, but I don't know that anyone's offered any strong opinions on things yet. So that work for everyone? Okay. In terms of ordering, I'm just going to go down our pivot for 2023 town meeting approvals, and I'm going to focus only on items out of the general or ambulance fund. And I'll just be very clear as I go through them. And really, just as I say an item, just want to hear if anyone has any comments, questions, or concerns. Otherwise, I'm going to assume there's support behind it, so I can frame some of our emotions as we vote. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So the first is the truck 43 for the DPW, which we heard about from Karen for last time, which is $200,000 currently slotted in the general fund, but as we heard, probably can allocate between water and general, assuming this is moving forward. Anything on this one?
No.
Road and sidewalk maintenance, I think we already agreed last time. We were just going to keep these numbers as placeholders and await further direction from the pavement management program that's being undertaken. Plus, we need feedback directly from the select board about what role they want us to have in the new ARPA funding versus maintenance, so that we can form a recommendation. So that one might be one that we have placeholders going into that meeting on the 20th. Anyone change their mind on that one? All right. What about the operations supervisor vehicle? So I have some reservations on this one. Not that it doesn't need to be replaced. I think any vehicle over 100,000 miles doing that type of work needs to be considered. I think we need to rethink how it's used if we are going to invest the money in it. So while I think it should stay on the capital plan, I'm disappointed it wasn't on the radar sooner, that it kind of just popped in the last month. I don't know that it needs to necessarily wait for a new DPW superintendent, but I guess my question is to you, Mark, on this one is, if we're going to invest $100,000 in a vehicle, are we going to come up with policies around how it can be used, especially given the amount of equipment on it?
I think, I'm not sure if it's policy worthy, but I think there needs to be some understanding as to what exactly it's being used for, how it's being used. I know that, when the superintendent's vehicle was purchased, it was a little bit more of a heavy duty vehicle because they put a plow on the front of it. So I agree that I think there needs to be an understanding as to, what we're anticipating the vehicle to do. Is it simply, a vehicle to, a take-home vehicle for the supervisor to be able to be on call and be available? Is it, first on the scene, so it has to have some equipment on it to be able to begin to triage the issues as they arise? I don't have the answers right now as to that, to give you an understanding about what we should be using the vehicle for, or how it should be structured. So I do think that needs some thought, and the time is quickly approaching between the end of one DPW superintendent and the beginning of another to be named. So as much as you say that you're not sure we need to wait for the new person, I still think there's going to have to be there'll be some input, from whoever assumes that role.
Yeah, and I meant it from, I don't want to wait for them to bring it forward. Not, I think we do need input from them on how they would structure the fleet. And if this is, right, I think it's prudent to leave a placeholder so we don't set them up for failure on day one. And we can obviously, I don't want to start adjusting things, but, we can obviously go lower a lot easier than we can go higher.
Yeah, I mean, because we've been replacing our vehicles on a regularly scheduled replacement schedule, we've been able to keep our maintenance lines low, because we've done a nice job with that. So yeah, I understand the need to balance those two.
Okay. Joe, I see your hand.
Weren't we supposed to receive an updated vehicle schedule before Karen left? Was that what she said?
That's what you have in your minutes. So I thought about that as I was reviewing your minutes. She hasn't left yet.
Yeah,
So-
no, I was thinking about that when you brought up your point, because that's what I was thinking about that point. So
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I just given it sounds like the vehicle requirements are a bit in flux. Does it make any sense to defer the purchase of a new vehicle until the next fiscal year? Can our current vehicle fleet support the DPW and the new superintendent for another year? Or do you think it's critical that we have that new vehicle in this next fiscal year?
The problem is you wait a year. If you follow the current select board's policy, they didn't want to do financial articles in the fall, right? But I think at a bare minimum, no matter what we vote on this, we have an obligation to make sure select board and advisory realize that, there needs to be a more concrete vehicle plan. Like even if, like Joe, to your point, a plan comes forward, right? We need to make sure that the new DPW superintendent is on board with that plan and doesn't have a different thought process. I just look at what happened with our change of police chief, right? Look at what happened with the body cameras in that approach, right? Totally changed how we're approaching that situation. So, it probably could wait another year, but the question is, what does downtime cost us? Is it a plow in the middle of plow season? Is it that plow X person's road? I don't know that we have the right people to answer that question, nor do we have kind of a magic 8-ball to tell us what the answer is.
Yeah, I guess if we have the financial flexibility to leave it in, I think that, hedges our risk, and I would leave it in. But if we're pressed to cut back, I might consider that.
So instead of a strong support, or we'll call this a placeholder for now. Is everyone on board with that? Brian and Mark, would this be subject to a water fund allocation as well?
I would think so. I defer to
think so, too.
Brian, but I would think it would be.
Agreed.
Okay. Let's do a motion as by department, if that works for everyone, just to, I don't know where we're going to go from here. So I'm going to move that capital planning support the replacement of truck 43, put placeholders for road maintenance and sidewalk maintenance subject to the pavement management program, and keep a placeholder for the operations supervisor vehicle, with the understanding that a more formal vehicle replacement program will be presented by both the current and future DPW superintendent prior to town meeting.
Second.
Is there any further discussion on that motion? All right, roll call vote. Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
I,
and Malinowski's aye. All right, let's go to facilities. Here we have the library installation of security cameras. John Parent actually emailed today asking for a reduction from 25 down to 15 for this. We have an open item from the last meeting. I believe it was Tony when this was brought forward, asking about policy about cameras in public buildings outside of public safety. I have Mark's assurances that he will work on a policy with the appropriate individuals, whether it be select board and or town council, if this were to move forward. Are there any other questions outstanding from anyone on this? Karen, is your hand raised on this, or is it still from last time? Good, Joe.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a question. Just, I think I'm still where I was the last meeting going, how necessary are these and what purpose are they going to really serve the public? Is there a problem there? Is this for preventative? You know what I mean? It's not a big line item, but it's just one of those things that I'm just not totally sold on just yet. I probably should be at this point, but I'm not.
I mean, if you go back to the original form that was submitted, I think it talked about obviously protection of property. I don't know the total value of the assets in that building, but
Yeah, neither do I. In this day and age, I'm more concerned about the safety of the kids, I think, than I am the property in the library. Given having been there an awful lot, but if I was to be really sold, that would be probably the number one thing on my list.
I think a valid point. I think Tony's point also was the comings and goings into a building, right? All right, is there any further discussion on that one? Townhouse office furniture replacement. Just as a reminder, we had punted this one from last year because of the ongoing Woodward discussions. My only comment on this is obviously furniture that goes in now would likely possibly be able to be moved depending on what you do, right? So if you put in I'll call it a more modern looking desk as opposed to the very formal wood. I don't know where these desks are going, but I would just caution if we do approve this that there be some thought put into the plan. I realize people can't be in failing desks for another 5 to 8 years, depending on what we do. But at the same time, these things should last. And I'm not sure that solid wood is what we want to be doing, like built-in sort of thing. But I'm not a designer by any means. It was just a commentary of how office space tends to look these days. Any other comments on that? Oh, Joe, go ahead.
We haven't, or I don't remember asking the question as to whether the renovations will affect any of these sorts of purchases, or as you said, moving them around.
Well, the plan from John basically has the prison workshop doing most of the work. So to me, that's probably stuff you wouldn't be moving to a new building. Now, we also haven't decided how we'd be using the existing space too, so may be able to just be continue, right? That's what I'm saying. I don't want to hold something up, but I just want at least some thought to go into, like, at least we know, yes, this stuff is staying here, and unless you've got the space, it can stay or it can go, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to be honest, though, some of the furniture that the prison has made for some of the individual offices, very movable. So, that stuff can move, from building to building. I think the things that, probably end up staying with the property, or a lot of the counter spaces and the things that you see on the first floor in the townhouse in the open area, that's made for the space. There's just no way that you could move that. But some of the other individual offices on the treasurer's side where the desks were replaced with things that were made by the prison, those are very movable. But yes, maybe not as modern as the chair is seeking.
Again, I'll leave this to far more qualified people. I just want to, make sure that there's some thought that this isn't probably a permanent situation. Any other questions on that? Facilities maintenance. We carry a placeholder for it, but it usually appears as a separate article. Any comments, questions on this?
No.
And then DPW annex, for everyone, just to make sure everyone understands what DPW annex is, that's the old fire station 2 on Harrington Court off of, on the south side. So this would be to replace the furnace down there. The building is clearly being used for the DPW now. I know facilities has indicated a desire, that they could potentially use it for a number of things. I know Mark has indicated a bunch of needs. You probably saw it in the draft presentation that we'll talk about in our next one. I just think the select board needs to decide what they want to do with this building going forward. But as long as they can, at least in my personal view, as long as they can assure us that it's going to stay in the town's custody, I think this is a prudent expense. But for those of you that don't remember, this was not too long ago on a town meeting warrant article to be disposed of. It didn't pass. I think it was coupled with Fayetteville, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know there was this property. A little bit of hypothesis there, but it has been on the block before, and I don't want to put a new furnace in and then decide 2 years later that we're gonna dispose of it and turn it into X, Y, or Z. Joe, go ahead.
In addition to that, does anybody have any handle on what the near and long-term costs of repair would be on the generally on the building, roof, the rest of that?
The next thing I see in the capital plan is 5 years out for the roof of 70,000. But I think the bones of the building appear to be very solid, which is I think why John Parent raves about the building quite often. It just doesn't have a working septic is the main issue. So any questions on facility articles? Okay. The other thing I should just make everyone aware of, I'm not going to make a vote on. I didn't amend the agenda. It came in too late. We will discuss at our next meeting. John is requesting some elevator improvements that are required by the state inspector to a few of our buildings. The numbers in the 25K-ish range. I will get you all the details for a future meeting, but that may be an item that slips into this list. So I want to at least acknowledge it, but I don't think it's prudent to discuss it because I didn't have time to properly amend the agenda. So I wanted to at least get it on everyone's radar. So does anyone want to hold anything on facilities from what we discussed? All right, then I will move that we support the facilities capital improvements as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. So that's unanimous. Next, we'll go on to fire. Obviously, a lot. We heard from Chief Achilles, it seems like a long time ago at this point. He has had one follow-up discussion with Brian and I that I'll walk you all through as we go through this. But this is, I think, where some of everyone's ambulance fund questions come in. So we've all heard about the all-terrain utility vehicle. We currently have that as 40K slotted out of ambulance. there any further discussions on that one? Defibrillators, these are the basic defibrillators that go in everything but the 2 ambulances. Any discussions on these? $12K from the ambulance fund. The defibrillator paramedic, these are what the chief commonly referred to as the life packs. If you remember when he came to us originally, he talked about the vendors coming out with a newer model, but the timing is it's imminent, but we don't know exactly how it's going to fall with our budget cycles. The proposal that we have right now is for kind of the current model, not the new model. It seems that the department is trending towards the newer model, which would create an asset that lasts us longer. There's really 2 questions. One, whether they'll be ready for purchase next fiscal year and when during that fiscal year. And 2, whether the pricing that we have now on the current models will actually move to the new models. So I think there's a few ways we can deal with it. If the department's trending that direction, I really hesitate, especially given that we're not appropriating from the general fund, i.e. raising taxes. We're really submitting an authorization to town meeting to fund it out of the ambulance fund. I would suggest that we potentially bump this number up a little bit. My thought would be to 100,000. So the authorization's there. We don't have to call a special town meeting, and the chief can work with Brian, Mark, and Carla if the fund gets close, right? So they could basically phase the purchase, like, do 1 in June, 1 in July sort of thing, if they really had to, or, look at other sources, or pull back on some of the other things that are there. But I think this would give them a little more flexibility by getting the town meeting authorization to do it. And then it would be up to the finance team to make sure that the appropriate funds are there to actually effectuate the purchase. And of course, if things go sideways and those funds aren't there, which we would know by 6/30 of this year, right, in terms of our closeout balance, it still does give you the option in the fall to come back to it and reappropriate. But I'd rather go the way we think this is going to end up, as opposed to waiting and then having the timing that Life Pack comes out not line up with our budgetary cycle. So that's where I'm at. I think it's a worthwhile asset. I think it could save any one of us at any point in time. So I don't really want finances to get in the way of this. It's a pre-negotiated price based on state bid list. So, Joe, I see your hand up.
If I recall correctly, these are things we have to have anyway. So let's just put the 10 grand on there and move on.
Okay.
You have my support.
Jeff, Karen, anything else on that one?
Yeah, I would agree with Joe. I mean, my reaction to looking at the ambulance fund is that we've got plenty of room. That's how everything's been trending as well. I don't think $10,000 is going to hold us back from any other potential costs that are going through that fund.
Yeah, and well, the other thing is Brian has the option to bond it as well. Right, these are, and he's not going to bond it for 30 years, but like these are long-lived assets, so he has that option if he needed to spread the payment out too. Chief, I see your hand up. I'm going to come back to you once we get through all the fire stuff. If you have something you want to add. Okay, so then portable radios. We heard from Chief Newell last time a little bit about this. He did call me again this afternoon. We're still waiting on a combined quote that shows fire and police together. We have fire alone. We have police alone. Brian, do you want to speak to your intentions with this? Like it's what you're going to do if, regardless of whether the town moves forward just fire or fire and police?
Yeah, I think this is another bondable item that we could maybe spread the payment over 5, 6, 7 years of useful life. So that gives us another option of maybe, lessening the burden on any one year. Certainly, the cost is definitely justifies it, so.
So I think for what the town is trying to do budgetarily, I think if we keep this kind of where we have the placeholder from the sourcing from an ambulance fund, Brian has the potential to bond it. It's not going to impact the general fund. What capital needs to weigh in on is whether you believe this is the right time to purchase it. And I've heard no objections to date, but I just want to make sure none have perked up since.
No.
Okay. Next was durable medical equipment for 20,000. Any comments on that? Okay. Fire PPE.
Just a quick question. Do we think that's still a good number in terms of inflationary concerns? Should that go up a little bit, or are we good there?
And just for the record, that's 40.
Yeah.
We'll ask the chief when I bring him over for whatever he wanted to comment on. Ambulance power stretcher 55 out of the ambulance fund. Any concerns with this? I'm going to pause before I go to the tower. Chief, I assume you still wanted to comment? If so, just mind putting your hand back up. All right.
Hey, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I was just going to add, and I appreciate the support for the defibrillators. I know that we had the regular defibrillators in the budget, and we can move those out if required. We did just an assessment of the inventory and realized we can probably get another year out of those. So if that helps offset some of our requests, we could do that. I don't know what anybody's comment would be on that, but that was $12,000, I think. And I know last year we got a couple grants that we were able to get a couple of them with. So I think we can, if that helps the offset the additional that was added to the defibrillators for the ambulances.
So if you did that, all your defibrillators would still be current and operational through 6/30 of 24. So you won't need a new one until 7/1 of 24 at the earliest.
Correct.
Well, that just saved that would knock 2,000 off if you take my add of 10 and your reduction of 12. If you're comfortable with it, I certainly have no objection.
We are.
Anyone have any questions for Chief on that? All right, Chief, while we have you, there was a comment on your PPE 40K, and just whether the cost of gear has gone up and whether you're still okay with 40K for next year.
And I apologize. I thought we had 25 in for FY24, but Brian, I'm not positive. And I know this is something that some of the schools have assisted us on. My comment is, I thought we had 25, so 40 would be plenty. We
need more than 5 sets of gear next year, like using 5K a pop, or
and the challenge right now is supply chain. We're behind, so I feel I would appreciate a little more flexibility on that in case something happens, because we may be better off ordering it earlier, stuff that we would need in FY25 earlier, because it's taken 6 to 12 months to get it. So if it's 40, we're very pleased with that, and we could live with that.
All right. Any questions for the chief on anything before we get to the tower chassis and body repair? Chief, I'll just keep you on in case you want to chime in. So this one we have slotted for 100,000. We had a preliminary discussion. I think there's obviously a lot more that needs to occur. And I think, my personal opinion is I think the discussion has to involve this committee, but it goes well beyond this committee in terms of, I think, select board, town administration, and advisory, given the long-term future here in terms of this asset. And just knowing, obviously, the discussion that occurred about this asset before any of us really were involved with the town from a committee perspective. So my recommendation is that we keep 100,000 in as a placeholder, funding source of ambulance. I don't think we rush this particular decision. And I think we highlight it for a much broader discussion with the select board when we meet with them in December. And then between now and then, Chief, you can obviously continue to gather the stuff, because I think this is really an operational item that you and your department have to make a recommendation on what you operationally recommend. And then obviously it's going to come down to dollar and cents in some way, shape, or form. But I'm personally not prepared to go any which direction on this, because I think it needs more stakeholders and the chiefs probably to make a presentation specific to this topic. I don't know what others think. Go ahead, Joe.
Chief, if I'm correct in this, the discussion that we had was really that this was about maintaining the truck and preparing it for the next, 5 to 8 years or so, to make sure that it was entirely going to stay whole and safe. Because I believe I was, a little bit skeptical, but your explanation turned me around the corner, so to speak. And you're still of the opinion that that will last us out for a number of years so that we do not have to buy a new one. Because that's really the only other alternative is to sell this and buy another one, isn't it?
And I think Mr. Malinowski is correct. This is not a clear cut. Hey, this is the direction we need to head in. We need to keep the vehicle on the road, and that's why the submittal was made. Of course, the question is this the appropriate truck with some of its limitations that we have? And it's probably one of the largest expenses the town would have other than building a building. And I don't take that lightly. And I know there was a lot of commitment when this was purchased a little over 10 years ago with donations and a lot of town support. Discouraging that, again, with the manufacturing of fire trucks, a replacement's $1.8 million, $1.7 million could be in, of course, the concern as you go down the road, it could be in 5 years, $2 million. So I think Mr. Malinowski is correct, is that my recommendation is that we keep this money in because it may be the best option for the next 3 to 5 years, maybe longer, until we vet out other needs in the town, because this is a pretty huge one. And I want to make sure operationally we're doing the right thing. We need an aerial device, whether it's that size or scope or features, that's another discussion. We've been trying to do some research on it, but I would recommend right now that we keep this money in there, that as we go through the process, that this may be our best short-term option. And then hopefully the market in manufacturing slow down a little bit and calm down a little bit, and we have less volatile numbers to deal with.
So there's nothing unsafe about the truck as it is at the moment.
Currently, no. But the items that we identified in this request are concerning, and I don't want it to be come spring or next fall or next winter where we have an issue and now we're asking for emergency funds. This is truly preventative in nature, based on the assessment we had from one of our dealerships on the vehicle itself. So nothing's imminent, but as I said in our previous conversations, we need to do something, or we could be in a position where it's out of service. And I don't think the town really wants it to be that way.
All right. Any other questions on this topic? All right. Anyone want to move an item out of consideration because I have a separate vote? Okay, then I'm going to move that capital planning support all fire-related capital requests with a funding source of ambulance fund, with the exception of the fire PPE for FY24.
Second.
Okay. For purposes of discussion, I also want the minutes to reflect that further discussion and analysis needs to be performed on the tower before bringing that forward to town meeting, but that it's prudent to carry forward with the chief's placeholder, especially given that it shouldn't impact the financial budget modeling exercise that we're looking to line up to now, but also realize that Mark has a warrant to post in the not too distant future. Go ahead, Joe.
I believe you were also going to move the 12,000 for defibrillators out 1 year.
Yeah. So let me withdraw my motion. I'm going to move that capital support the fire capital articles as presented with 2 updates. One, the removal of the defibrillators for 12,000 and moving that to FY25, and increasing the defibrillators paramedic to 100,000. There's a second to that one.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion on fire?
Can we add to the motion funding source ambulance?
Yes. With the exception of the PPE. I had that in my original one, right? Yeah.
Yes, correct.
That's why I said as presented, because obviously the documents from the meeting. Yep. But thank you.
Understood, yep.
All right. I'm seeing no further discussion. So let's do a, let me just make this obvious point just before we take a roll call. If the ambulance fund goes south this year, i.e. the revenues start to dip, this may need to be revisited. But I think this will give the chief the ability to prioritize with the finance team if that does happen, right? So just because you're authorizing doesn't mean you're appropriating for this particular. That's why I think, Jeff, your point about making sure that's in the motion is important, right? And there are bonding mechanisms that we do have, right? That's solely within Brian's authority. So this is creating a flexible solution because I didn't hear anyone saying that none of this stuff wasn't needed and wasn't ready. If it wasn't ready, we wouldn't be voting to support it. So, okay, roll call vote. Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. So that's unanimous. Thank you, Chief. Good to see you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a safe evening.
Appreciate the call. All right. All right, police. We have police cruisers, 2 cruisers at 70 K each. These were both hybrid type vehicles. And these are gross, not net of the grant funding that John Parent will hopefully secure for these, like he has before. Any comments or questions? That Joe, is your hand up for this or last time?
Yes. Yeah, I had a question, just merely the accounting part of it. Because in this, they're listed as 140,000 from general fund, but then we also have the ambulance fund for 23 with a 60,000 notation. Is there any conflict in that? Or
60,000 was FY23. That's the year we're in now. We already approved that.
okay,
140 is what we're looking to approve for FY24.
oh, okay. Sorry, I'm looking at the top, the year of the approval. It says 23. So okay,
That's town meeting approval.
no conflict at all. Got it.
Yeah. Good question, though.
Hey, Jason, sorry, just to go back, did we miss the fire PPE? I think we.
No, that wasn't wrapped in my motion.
Okay,
I said
so-
all fire capital items as presented with a funding source of ambulance with the exception of the PPE.
Sorry, you're right.
Thank you for keeping me honest, though.
No, it's okay, because when I thought I had interjected, I was talking about funding source of ambulance fund, so. Okay, that's fine.
All right, so police cruisers, 2 at 70 each. Any questions, comments on this? Tasers, spent a lot of time on that body camera program. Brian, I think it's a comment for you. It's not necessarily intertwined with our vote, but we need to get the lease that we entered to for the tasers into the debt schedule. Right, unless you're carrying an operating, which I don't think you are.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I just want, because then this is really a body camera program, not a taser program at this point that we're approving. Are there any questions on this? Obviously, majority of it's grant funded. The 30K will be general fund. All right, then I will move that capital support the 2 police cruisers as presented and the body camera program as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. I also think it's important. I'm not going to motion it, but just we'll have in the minutes that capital reserves the right to add the police radios with a funding source of ambulance fund if once the appropriate math is presented. Again, doesn't impact Brian's budgetary exercise, but needs to be on a warrant. Does anyone object to that?
No.
Okay. We're almost there. So here's the deal with recreation. We all heard about Lundblad. That's obviously not coming to town meeting, but it's still sitting here. I think they're going to move it out a year for their grant funding, et cetera. So there's no action we can take there. I know there's still questions on that particular item in general, but they're not seeking funds yet. So there's no need to chase that down. Choate design, we kind of had slotted as rec revolving. Tim asked that we hold off on this just because he wants the commission to vote on a funding source. He left open the door that it may slip back into general fund. I don't think it's worth taking a motion until we see what their request is on this. We'll just denote it as an open item. Again, I think there's much larger moving pieces at this point than that, but I just don't want it to surprise anyone at the end of the day. Any questions on that? All right, so Southborough Schools has nothing for general fund. They are looking to do the Trotter lot, which they will use their revolving fund for. I've spoken to Greg and Keith about coming to give us a presentation, much like they did on Finn, just so we can improve the use of revolving fund to be consistent with the policy. So that's forthcoming. Again, no action for the warrant. And I think they're trying to tie that into Karen's paving contract that she's going out to bid on or has gone out to bid on. So we'll have a good number there. At the regional level, we're going to hear about the athletic complex on the 20th, right? So Greg, Keith, and a team will present that before we actually present to the select board. I've made everyone aware that we have not vetted that or taken a position on that as well. But you can kind of see some indicative costs here of Southborough's portion. There's going to be a lot of discussion about CPA versus general fund. The whole project does not qualify for CPA, mainly the turf aspects of it. However, we can't fund it out of all CPA, even if we had the money. Like, we don't have the money right now. So you're going to hear a lot of discussion about the surcharge for CPA. I don't know if that's going to happen that night or not, or if it's just going to stick to the project. I would say what I view our role as capital is one, we have to make sure this is the right time for the project and that the funding makes sense. It obviously has to go through the same exact process on the Northborough side. So basically they got to do everything double. And then we also think about the CPA aspect, capital, advisory, select board, right? There's a lot of stakeholders plus school committee. But it's a big project. It'll come through, not in our capital budget if approved going forward. It'll come through in the region's assessment. Big picture, just so you know, that the region currently has about $400K of capital every year allocated in our assessment. So if the current debt that they have in their books, $400K of that comes to us every year. That's not coming off the books for another couple of years. So this would be clearly incremental to their budget, unless there's some operational savings, which I don't know that we're going to hear about. So more to come on that. The redundant hot water heater is going to be back. I haven't heard how Greg plans to present that. And I believe there's some sidewalks that need to be repaired, which are an even smaller number than that. Again, this is going to come through the assessment. So it's not going to show up, Brian, I don't think, on our appropriation schedule at town meeting, probably, right? It's going to be buried in their budget, but obviously capital should have a view on what's going on there. The athletic complex may be a different story, I'm assuming, because of CPA funding and all of that. So, questions, comments, Karen?
Yeah, just on the redundant hot water heater, the total cost is 70, but but then over in the general fund, it's 86K.
It's 86.
I'm sorry?
It's 86. I have to update that. That's a good point.
Okay, and then on the regional athletic complex general fund, so the total is 2.2, and then what's the 25K that's in the general fund?
That's the cost for FY24. It's basically interest. Because
Okay.
it can be bonded. It's basically meant to present both, right? Like, there will be a future impact. You're actually not going to feel the impact at all next year. It's going to be the following years.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And Jason, just to follow up on Karen's point there, then the 745 is the upfront piece that's going through CPA.
Well, the reason I have it like that now is CPA hasn't voted that they're going to support it at all.
Yeah, understood.
But B, they then work with Brian on how much can be an appropriation versus bonded. And I wasn't going to try to guess what that number is. Versus we know the piece that would go through the general fund would have to be bonded. And that's what the region would do.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
My guess, Jeff, is everything's going to have to be bonded. And it's just going to be a matter of which fund it goes through, based on how many parties you have involved here in terms of Northborough and Southborough. And the region's the one that does the bonding, not Brian.
Okay.
And that's it. So Brian, do you have, obviously we got to clean some things up, but do you have roughly what you think you need to start forecasting?
Sure, after we connect tomorrow. But yes, no, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so then I will go to the next one, which is the presentation for select board and advisory. Obviously, I didn't include the chart yet because I didn't know how we were going to vote or where the conversation was going to go. We are going to have another quick meeting, like I mentioned. So what I'd like to do tonight is really just get any main comments that anyone has. If anyone has any issues with the content, any things they want to add, let's get it on the table here. And then I'll come back with a final once we have, now all these numbers have stopped, hopefully moving. And then we'll just ratify it quickly, unless you give me permission to just move forward with it without another meeting on that particular topic. That's also candidly an option. So I'll just open it up and see what people think or where they're at.
That was nicely done, Jason. Appreciate your work on this.
No, does that mean no comments?
No, I mean, I did have questions on where some of the stuff on 7 was coming from, but now it makes sense, like the department tower truck, so glad to see that highlighted, but yeah.
I mean, it mostly follows the framework we had last year. I think slide 8 is what's new. I.e. next year is what should wake some people up, right, in terms of what's coming. And that this, right, like that was a fairly easy discussion we all just had. We're going to need some policy decisions, is really what I hope they take away from that meeting, well before we get to this time next year. Because if South Union's still around, you've got a school roof, we're making good use of the ambulance fund this year. You've got a road project, you got a potential school building project. Not all necessarily going to hit from an appropriation perspective next year, but it may hit from a vote perspective. And something, not all that's going to be possible to bring forward. So how do you want to move forward on this? Do you want to come back and look at it one more time, have some more time with it? Or do you want to vote the framework now and I'll just work to finalize the numbers with Brian? Those are, I think, the two options.
I'm comfortable with voting now.
Jeff and Joe?
I agree with Karen.
I'm good.
All right. So I'll move that the committee authorize the chair to finalize the draft presentation with the treasurer and town administrator.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Hark,
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. The final item I just wanted to raise, because I probably should have raised it when we were talking about the schools, is there was a ARPA appropriation to the town for HVAC. I believe it was 100K, and Mark can remind us of all the when you got to spend it, but it's soon. It's not this year, but it's in the coming years and has to be designated pretty soon. We do have an HVAC project at Trotter next year. We have a townhouse HVAC project 2 years out. So I've asked Mark and Kathy as chair of the select board to have the select board discuss how they plan to use that. We can obviously inform the decision. That state ARPA money has nothing to do with the town. But just so everyone's aware that that 100 won't cover either of those projects. So depending upon the timing, that could, I don't want to say creep back in, but be something we should discuss as we move forward, just to make sure we don't lose that opportunity.
Jason, that's out of the ARPA money that the ARPA committee submitted recommendations for, or is it
No,
just
state. It was a state earmark from their
Okay.
funds.
okay? Well, that makes it
and-
a lot more fun.
Yeah, it is very specific to HVAC in a public building in Southborough.
Hmm.
So I don't know that Mark or anyone else can help us understand where it came from, because I don't think it came from the town, versus Northborough Road, which was in that same article that the state ratified, clearly came from the town.
Yeah, so with the Northborough Road money, Senator Eldridge was seeking projects in a certain dollar range with certain set of criteria, and that just happened to fit. This HVAC money is something, you know, I can only guess as to the genesis of it, being that during COVID, there was a lot of municipal buildings that had poor HVAC, had poor circulation and poor filtration systems, and they were looking to upgrade those. So every city and town, they kind of, you know, with with state ARPA money, it's like, okay, let's do this. And very targeted, very specific. And this is something that this governor has done. You know, they've taken amounts of money and they've made it very targeted, very specific for certain things. It kind of follows that path, but a lot of that is only a guess based on historical perspective.
So Jason, how much, do we have an idea of what the HVAC system would cost at Charter? I don't see it in the 24 town meeting approvals.
It's it's called Mechanical Systems Rooftop, Jeff.
Oh,
It's
so it's, okay, this would be like half of it.
yeah, 200,000 is their current estimate.
Okay,
But that's assuming we're not going to move forward a town building in some way, shape, or form.
So that'll be on the select board agenda on December 6th. To
Okay.
have that conversation, but I do agree with the way that the chair has kind of framed the discussion. You know, there's really not a project that we're aware of on the town side where we could just plug this in. And the time frame to use this is fairly tight. And we'd like to put it someplace, even if it's a school project. You know, it's going to help us because the money comes from the same pocket. You know, and so it's going to help us to reduce an assessment somewhere. So.
Okay. Public comment. Seeing none. So meeting schedule, we will meet on December 20th. Based on the discussion tonight, I think the only thing I could see needing to meet on is John Parent's request related to the elevators. Let me get some more information on that. And if we need to, I'll call like a very quick meeting right before that. We'll find the right time that works for everyone. Otherwise, let's just plan on the 20th being our next meeting with the select board. They start at 6:30. Mark, you'll let us know if Greg and team are first, then us. I assume there's not anything else that night, like at least from a scheduled appointments perspective.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the centerpiece of the evening.
Okay. All right. And then I'm planning to attend live, but they do have remote participation too, and we can count as a quorum if people can't make it live. So you have that option. And advisory is going to be there as well. Is there any other business? All right. I will motion that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Hark,
Hi.
Palmer,
Aye.
Wheeler,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. Thanks, everyone. See you in a few
Thank you.
weeks.